7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody who's here in person and also welcome everybody that's on Zoom. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is our first public information session about the 2022 City of Fort Atkinson Public Safety Referendum. We'll go ahead and introduce our participants on this side here. We have Councilmember Bruce Johnson, Councilmember Megan Hartwick, Councilmember Brandon Housley, Councilmember Mason Becker. We have Fire Chief Roush. I'm Rebecca Hausman-Lemire. I'm the city manager here. Police Chief Adrian Bump and Attorney Westrick, and our Clerk Treasurer Finance Director Michelle Albert. So this meeting is intended to provide Fort Atkinson residents with an opportunity to learn more about the need for the public safety referendum and to ask questions to help clarify your understanding of the referendum. We're going to run through a presentation tonight to provide you with some information about the challenges facing our police and fire departments, which will be followed up by a question and answer opportunity. The city council members, Chief Bump, Chief Roush, and myself are here and will be able to answer questions when we reach that point of the meeting. Thank you to all who have joined us here in person and to those joining us elsewhere. For those who are joining us virtually via Zoom, please be sure that your microphone is muted during the presentation portion of the meeting. Also, for those on the panel and those speaking at the microphone tonight, you will need to press the button and make sure the light is green in order for the folks on Zoom to hear you. So it is very important that those of us who are in person come to the microphone and during the question and answer period and introduce yourselves. So. Okay, with that, we can go ahead and start the presentation. Throughout the summer and fall of 2021, the City Council and city staff have discussed the need for additional public safety staffing in the city's police and fire departments. Chief Roush has requested to hire 6 paramedic firefighters and 6 advanced emergency medical technicians / firefighters to provide full-time 24/7 911 emergency medical services and firefighting services. Police Chief Bump has requested to hire 2 additional sworn police patrol officers to allow more proactive policing in the city. The city is limited in the amount that can be added to the property tax levy by the city's percentage of net new construction. In 2021, that percentage was 0.349%, which resulted in an allowable levy increase of approximately $18,000. The city does not have the funds available, nor the ability to increase the property tax levy to the extent necessary to fund these additional positions and city services. On January 18th, the City Council approved a resolution putting a public safety referendum question on the April 5th, 2022 ballot to ask the city's voters if they are willing to pay additional taxes so that the city can hire staff to provide additional services. First and foremost, I want to thank the City Council for their support for our proposals and their willingness to put this question to the voters. I also want to thank Chief Bump and Chief Roush for their diligence in working to identify solutions that will continue to ensure Fort Atkinson can provide its residents with high quality services into the future. Many people in this community do not understand that our fire department is made up mostly of volunteers. They leave their jobs, their families, their homes, or their beds to respond to calls. We have 4 full-time fire personnel currently, Chief Roush and 3 division chiefs. Together, they staff the fire department with 1 person, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We rely heavily on our volunteers, as 1 person cannot respond to a call in a fire truck or an ambulance. While this model has worked in decades past, when call volumes were lower, it's simply unsustainable to rely so heavily on volunteers, on part-time volunteers, staff time, given the growing current and anticipated future demand for the service. The police department, which includes 20 sworn officers, has had nearly stagnant staffing levels for the entire 21st century. In the last 2 decades, the need for police services has not been stagnant. It's been increasing. This becomes apparent when we look at how officers must spend their time. In a more ideal scenario, 60% of officer time would be dedicated to responding to calls, while 40% would be addressing community challenges and maintaining availability for serious emergencies. This is known as the rule of 60. In 2021, Fort Atkinson patrol officers spent an average of 78% of their time responding to calls and only 22% of their time on the more proactive side of policing. The takeaway is clear. Current staffing levels are too low for officers to be able to provide sufficient proactive policing services to our community. For both the police and fire departments, the number of calls for service has increased substantially over the last 10 years. Also, the type of call has shifted. The police department has to respond to an increasing number of complex calls relating to sexual assault, domestic violence, alcohol and drug-related issues, and mental health crises. This strains officers' time and ability to respond to additional calls that come in and pulls them away from proactive policing efforts. While some calls can be responded to promptly and handled within 10 minutes or less, more complex issues may take between 6 and 18 hours to manage. As you can see from the chart on the screen, staffing has remained at the same level or lower for the past 11 years in the police department, while the calls for service have increased by 42%. Since the mid-70s, the Fort Atkinson community has nearly doubled the number of annual calls for service for the fire department. However, the department has had stagnant full-time staffing. Calls falling during the workday can be hard for part-time volunteer staff to respond to due to work and family commitments. In 2020, 70% of calls came in during the work week, and 71% of calls were logged between the hours of 6 a.m. and 4 p.m. Having full-time EMS and fire staff on site at the fire station would decrease response times. Currently, on average, it takes 7 minutes for volunteers to get from their place of employment or their home to the fire station after a call comes in. This is known as rollout time. Then it takes an additional 4 to 5 minutes to get to a call location within the city. Adding full-time staff to the department would reduce this rollout time to just 90 seconds. As you can see from the chart on this page, full-time staffing in the fire department has remained at 4 since 2010 and actually since 1974, while the calls for service since 2010 have increased by 108%. At present, our critically urgent issue lies on the fire side of the fire department. We cannot continue as a volunteer reliant department. However, just adding full-time fire staff would not work. Instead, bolstering our fire service with full-time staff cross-trained in EMS is the best, most sustainable option to protect the long-term future of the community. That cross-trained staff operating out of the fire department will generate revenue to help offset the cost of the staffing proposal. Currently, the Fort Atkinson community calls for 1,250 ambulance responses per year, but just 1 ambulance is available per day in Fort Atkinson. This proposal includes 2 ambulances dedicated to 911 EMS service in-house at the fire department. Costs for the municipal service would be controlled by the city council and set through an annual fee schedule. Through municipal service, we can increase the level of service to patients while decreasing the patient cost for the service. So why do we need a referendum now? The city has explored other options, and the referendum is the only one available without drastic cuts to other personnel and services within the city. There are 2 main funding sources for local governments: property taxes and state shared revenue. Together, these 2 sources make up 88% of our general fund revenue budget. Property taxes are limited through the state limited by the state through levy limits, hence the need for a referendum. And state shared revenue has declined statewide by over $200 million since 2021 or since 2001, while the state income taxes continue to increase, creating a significant budget level at the significant surplus at the state level. However, we're not seeing anything of that nature at the local level. So this slide includes the actual referendum question as it will appear on the ballot on April 5th. This is the technical language and structure as required by state law. I'm not going to read it, but I will point out a couple numbers in here that are important. 0.349%, that is the 2021 net new construction number. We have to use that number for 22, even though we don't have the actual 22 number yet per the statutes, how this question is structured. The $7,871,614 is the estimated tax levy for the city in 2022. The $8,640,949 number, that is the amount, the estimated total levy for 2023 if the referendum is approved. And the 769,335 number is the amount that the city will be permitted to add to the tax levy annually in the future. There is no escalator on this amount, and there is no sunset. We only have one question because there's a requirement to include a total levy for the calendar year through this question. If there were 2 or even 3 separate questions, only one could pass, and there's no way that we could guarantee that only one would pass due to the yes/no nature of referendum questions. So if the referendum is approved by a majority of voters on April 5th, the city will be able to add 6 additional firefighter paramedics, 6 firefighter advanced emergency medical technicians, and 2 additional police patrol officers. If the referendum is approved, the annual property tax would increase by an estimated $82.22 per $100,000 of assessed property value, starting with the bills issued in December of 2022. For example, the impact to a property valued at $160,000 would be $131.55 annually, or $2.52 per week. $100,000 is used as an easy multiplier, and $160,000 is the average assessed value of a single family dwelling in the city. In presenting this information over the past several weeks, we've become aware that some residents don't fully understand where their taxes go. So we added this slide to just have people understand that while they pay the bill at City Hall, the city only receives roughly 32% of the tax bill. Of that 32%, 43% of that goes to public safety currently. So if the referendum fails, the city will be faced with difficult decisions about how to address the growing need for public safety services. A no vote is not a status quo vote. Staff would have to consider releasing a request for proposals for 911 services, 911 EMS services, possible drastic reductions to other departmental staff and services, or another referendum in November of 2022. So at this point, we will answer as many questions as we can between now and 8 o'clock. For questions that come in that we are not able to answer in the time allowed, we will post the answers on the city's website. We also have an email address that's set up. You can see on the screen, referendum@fortatkinsonwi.net. We can answer one-on-one questions that may arise tonight or over the course of the next few weeks before Election Day through that email address. Tonight, we will switch off between in-person questions and virtual questions. So we'll start with a question from somebody in the room and then pivot to questions from our virtual participants and so on. Clerk Ebert will go down the sign-in sheet and call on folks. When she does that, please come to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and ask the question. A note on written questions. We do have city staff and our communications consultants online on the Zoom tonight. They can see questions submitted via Zoom in the comment section. We'll also read questions. We will attempt to read questions out loud in the order they come in and answer them. You may ask one question at a time so we get to everybody who has questions. If you have additional questions, we'll circle back, or you can always use that referendum email address. Remember to state your name and address prior to asking your question like you would at any other public meeting. And let's see, I will end the share here. Okay, we will start with somebody in the room. So Clerk Ebert, if you have somebody on your list.
Sure, I'm Micah Fromatter from 330 Wilson Avenue, Fort Atkinson. Yes, please. If the microphone has a red dot, just press the center button and it'll be green.
Micah Fromatter, 330 Wilson Avenue. I guess the first question I have is, what's the total budget? Meaning personnel, what's the launch budget between equipment and the 12 fire EMS personnel?
Let's see. Okay, so the fire and EMS proposal, the total cost for year 3, which is what we used for the referendum, would be $1.3 million. That does not include the $500,000 startup costs that the city has. We have $250,000 coming from a community foundation grant and $250,000 coming from our ARPA funds to pay for the startup costs. So that $1.3 million cost is for the fire and EMS proposal. The police proposal is about $206,000. And then we did use projected revenues to come up with the net cost of the $769,335. Okay, is there an online question?
If you are on Zoom and you would like to ask a question, please unmute yourself or turn on your video.
So how much does Fort Atkinson as a community currently pay for EMS services per year?
While staff addresses that, can you please state your name and address, please? Tom, on Zoom, if that was you that asked that question, can you please state your name and address, please?
Okay, our current contract price with with Ryan Brothers is about $109,000. That is does not include any other revenue sources for that. Is there another person wishing to ask a question in person?
Aaron Ryan. 1210 Art Street is the local address provided.
Hello, everybody. Aaron Ryan, property owner at 1210 Arndt Street. I do have a quick statement and a question that has a couple parts to it. So Ryan Brothers' first priority is public safety. I do have staff that live in this area, so that is very important to me. A close second is being responsible steward and transparent with taxpayer dollars. Thirdly is to have information presented and compared apples to apples so citizens can make the best informed decision. How did this group arrive at the billing revenue number of $675,000?
Do you want to take that one?
So we used average revenue per call, somewhat based on the annual reports that you provide, but also our billing service, looked at our payer mix and our reimbursement rates.
Could you tell me what the payer mix you used?
I can't tell you right off the top of my head, but we pulled that directly from our billing service records management system. Looking at the revenue that we're currently collecting, and then our billing service helped us translate that to a percentage of an ALS service, and taking that along with the other cost savings to bring those revenue numbers in, we believe that our numbers are very appropriate for what we're proposing.
Okay, so professionally, you're about 200,000 over. And again, this is important for the public to know. So a third of those calls, those 1,250 calls, a third or 300 will be no transports, and there will be no way to charge for those.
We understood that and we took that into consideration.
75% are government paid transports with Medicare and Medicaid. So I know averages show good on paper, but the reality is after 20 years of experience, there is a different payer mix that Fort Atkinson has. And just want to make sure everyone aware that when we're looking apples to apples, that information get compared the same way.
Do you have a question?
That was my question.
Okay, so can we take a
sure.
question from somebody online then?
Yep,
Because
the
we're
last
doing
one on
one.
this
in
is how
one.
long is the levy debt payback period?
The levy debt payback period? We're not seeking any debt for this proposal. So we're not borrowing anything for this proposal. So there is not a debt. There's not a debt component.
So the $700,000, what would that be considered then?
That
you
would
have
be
to use each
considered
year?
operating funds, part of the levy moving forward.
Operating fund.
Thank you. Is there somebody, another question online via Zoom?
Go ahead, Jude.
Yeah, Jude Hartwick, 704 North Main Street, Fort Atkinson. The question I have is for Chief Bump, just kind of curious as to the new social work position for the police department. Is that going to continue? Is that grant funded, or is that going to be one of the two new hires?
No, that's going to be separate. This is social worker is a pilot program in conjunction with Jefferson County Human Services. So this is outside of this proposal, and that comes to us in that pilot program tax-free and has no cost to it. It's a partnership, and we hope to sustain it as long as we see value to it, and also Human Services sees value to it.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Eric Schultz, 365 Ramesh Avenue.
Again, my name is Eric Schultz, 365 Ramesh Avenue. Thank you, Manager Lemire, Chief Roush, Chief Bump. Just some questions that I've got come across interacting with residents throughout the city. I'm just stating I have no bias for or against with my question. My question is, if the referendum fails, or just actions we should be doing now, have we explored all options as either residents or as city leaders to bring down the number of calls, such as increased fines or ordinances?
Over the last 7 years, since I've been with the agency, we've looked at a lot of different ways to streamline our operations, to save money, but also to reduce calls for service. One of the ways that we did that was by the implementation and adoption of a chronic nuisance property ordinance. Our hopes with that ordinance was that if we had problem locations in the city where we had multiple calls for service, we could compel the property owner and the residents who live in the home to change their ways, not only with fine, but also for them to pay for police or emergency services that they are draining. So that's one area where we've tried to address problem areas or chronic nuisances. And I don't know that we've seen the impact that we hoped we would see. And another area that we've done to try to proactively reduce calls for service was our multi-year work with CBRFs, group homes in the communities, trying to do a call reduction where the group homes are not relying on public safety to solve their problems and to deal with struggles or crisis that they deal with. So we've looked at a bunch of different ways to try to address things and hopefully make a positive impact. But you could continue to try different things, but it makes it hard when you don't have quite enough manpower to deploy towards those things, because even with a new ordinance comes time and work in enforcing that ordinance. So sometimes it can be a good thing, but other times it can create a little bit more work in a different area as well.
And on the fire side, when I came here in 2016, I reviewed the response profiles for the department, implemented some changes to responses that actually reduced the call volume by about 10%. That has helped for a few years, but the numbers just keep creeping back up. A large percentage of our increase is directly related to EMS because our current contract doesn't provide enough depth of coverage for the EMS needs of the community. As of tonight, we have responded to 44 EMS calls this year already. And that's because our EMS provider generally has one unit available in the community that's dedicated to 911. So translating that to calls for the volunteers, our volunteer response keeps increasing. And in my opinion, it's reached the point that EMS and fire response using only volunteers is no longer sustainable. There will be a significant failure of the system. And once the volunteer system has a significant failure or collapses, it will be very hard to rebuild that.
Okay, is there somebody online who has a question?
Go for it.
Okay, this is Curtis Abendroth, 1000 North Main Street. I realize that over the years, the school district has gone for referendums by going over their allotted amount, but they're having to bring this up every 3 years. Have you considered doing the same thing with the idea that maybe at some point in time, the state with their budget surpluses will kick in a little bit more to the cities such as Fort Atkinson for the uses that you propose?
Thank you for your question. So the need for full-time staff will not end in 3 years or 10 years, which is why we didn't put a sunset on it. So if this referendum is approved by the voters, will be authorized to levy this amount into the future to support the services. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to recruit and retain qualified individuals to serve in these positions if there was a sunset or an end date. And as far as relying on the state to offer us additional state shared revenue or some other solution, I would not bank on that, as that has not been the experience that I've had in the past 17 years of my career in local government.
Okay, thank you.
Chiefs? Either of the chiefs have anything to add?
I would just be concerned about sustainability of a program that has a sunset on it or a revote for it. Our goal is to bring in people, qualified people, and retain those qualified people. So we better serve the community. It costs a lot of money to train people. And when they get to a point where they are independent and working at the highest level possible, that's where you really get your value in the community. And those people we're asking to come be a part of our community and live in our city, not only as a city employee, but as someone that's a resident. So it would be hard to have to see that person leave after 3 years. It's difficult already when you lose people, or when people move on, you build strong bonds with them.
I would echo that there is a tremendous amount of competition today for EMS and firefighters in both career positions and volunteer. I would hate to see these volunteers who we are looking to convert to career positions walk away from a good job and then 3 years from now have to again go and look for work. So I would strongly advocate that it not be a recurring situation.
Thank you.
Roger Toman.
Good evening. Roger Toman, 639 Grove Street, Fort Atkinson. Several questions, but I'll just try to consolidate it in one. As far as this plan or this structure of staffing, you've mentioned the 6 individuals in each of the 2 fire and EMS, and then the 2 for the police. So obviously those people though are going to get increases over the years, et cetera, and their cost is going to go up. And services, I know we don't know for sure what the needs are going to be necessarily. We've seen a large spike recently. Perhaps some of that in the last couple of years has been related to our pandemic, and I don't know if you want to address that. But I also, I guess, in thinking at some point you had a forecast as to how long these individuals will stay under the funding level that you're seeking. So I guess, what sort of time horizon is this plan good for, that we won't be coming back and asking for some additional resources of whatever type? And then where in the mix of this staffing structure do we consider the existing model with the volunteers and with the private EMS? Do they still have a role? And if so, what's that role? Thank you.
I can address the sustainability. We believe that this staffing plan, as we're proposing it, will carry the department at least 10 years into the future before additional changes may be needed. I don't think any of us can forecast exactly what's going to be happening 10 years from now. But we believe this is still sustainable. To be clear, this plan still includes use of primarily volunteer force. This is a basic staffing level that will reduce calls for our volunteers by about 200 calls a year, but the volunteers will still be an important part of the operation. On the EMS side, there's still a large portion of the EMS service, which is interfacility transfer, interfacility transports, which will remain with a private vendor. What we are talking about taking over is only the 911 response. And in order to do that, we're going to staff 2 dedicated 911 ambulances assigned to our district. So the city and the portions of 5 townships that we cover. You want to talk about the funding anymore?
Sure. We can, the city will be growing. We do have about 75 acres of land on the north side that will, we're looking to hopefully work with a developer to start construction on that in 2023. So we will have higher net new construction numbers into the future. And we do, the intention is that there's no escalator, there's no increase in this set amount through the referendum. However, we do believe that there will be some net new construction that will allow us to increase our levy over time. Okay, is there anybody online wishing to ask a question?
I do have a question. Brittany Worth, 1218 Talcott Street. Referring to the presentation that was provided, it was referenced that fire and EMS would be responding to, correct me if I'm wrong, an increased or higher level of care and calls. If I'm incorrect, please correct me, but what does that mean as far as call type? Because to my understanding, Ryan Brothers was providing paramedic level service.
What that referred to is the fact that we will provide 2 dedicated 911 units where there's only 1 dedicated 911 unit at this time.
And we will also be providing the service at a paramedic level.
Thank you.
Cody Letson, and I'm sorry, I cannot read your address.
Cody Letson, 3740 East Jacobs Drive. Okay. So, hi everyone, my name's Cody. I oversee the 911 stuff here for Ryan Brothers in Fort Atkinson. My question is just kind of based off of the trends. You guys say that there's currently 1 ambulance servicing the community. A majority of the time, I feel that we have 3 ambulances, how we look at it, with the 2 from Ryan Brothers and the 1 from the Fort Atkinson Fire Department. I guess my question would be for the chief, in a scenario where, let's say, your on duty staff were to go to, say, a car accident, your primary ambulance and your engine roll out and a second EMS call comes in, how is that response going to be any different than the current one scenario? And is there guaranteed to be a paramedic on that second ambulance?
No, our 3rd ambulance today is not staffed by a paramedic.
Okay.
So that 3rd unit will not necessarily be an ALS unit. It could be a BLS unit staffed by the volunteers, just as it is today.
Okay. So in that scenario, the service that the community would receive is not equivalent to the current, where the second ambulance out is a paramedic level rig. Is that correct?
Except for the fact that over the last several months and probably the last year, the availability of 735 has decreased significantly.
Okay.
And our call volume has increased significantly because of that.
Okay. Well, and if that's the scenario, I guess as a community, have any of you guys considered approaching Ryan Brothers to amend the contractual service for the community?
That wouldn't address the firefighters. And that's really what we're trying to get at, a solution to the fire side of this equation.
Okay.
So with an additional ambulance provided by Ryan Brothers, we would have to pay for the additional ambulance plus staffing for the fire service.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody online?
Yeah, I have a question. Melissa Overdahl, 620 Washington Street. What portion of the call volume / revenue is represented by the township within the Fort Fire District?
About 28% of total calls, whether it be fire or EMS.
Thank you.
I have no more on this sheet. I will check the other sheet in the hallway.
Okay. Is there anybody online wishing to ask a question? Is there anybody online wishing to ask any questions? Okay, we'll give Clerk Everett a minute to.
David Neal, 1113 Maple Street.
David Neal, 1113 Maple Street. I really don't have a question. Just really want to offer my support. We really have a great city here in Fort Atkinson. I have the privilege of pastoring one of the churches here in Fort Atkinson. And before COVID, I had a couple of unique opportunities to ride along with the police officers. And also this past summer, fire department was actually there to support a member of our church. And, just a huge support. So I just can't say enough about the police here, about the fire department as well. And I think that here we have groups of men and women who are willing to really come in when everyone else goes out. They're coming in.
Is your microphone on, sir? I'm sorry. Is there a green button there?
Sorry,
Okay.
it's green now.
Okay,
Do I need
great.
to say everything over again? I might make some mistakes if I have to say everything over again. All right, so again, I'm just expressing my great support for our city, all of our first responders here in Fort Atkinson. As the pastor here, I've seen firsthand what they do for us. Again, they're constantly coming in when everyone else is out, going out. And I think saying yes to this referendum is a great way that we can finally say yes to them. You know, they've come in for us. They've been there for us. Now let's be there for them. Personally, this is a no-brainer. I think everyone is aware that with how society is, unfortunately, we're not getting better. You know, we want to, but unfortunately, that just may not be the case. So I think now is the time to really give our city the support that everyone needs. And it's not just a win for the departments. It's a win for Fort Atkinson. And so I say that voting yes to this referendum is a must. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this will be the last call for anyone wishing to speak on the Zoom. Okay, thank you. And at this point, we will open it up to the city council members. If there's any city council members who would like to make a statement or ask any other questions or any other input.
We know I always have things to say. Before I get into a couple of statements from my end, though, I did want to ask Chief Rouse just one thing to clarify. This has come up in previous referendum discussions that I have been in with him, and I think it's just a really important point for the public to understand. Chief, I know it was in the presentation, but can you just highlight a little more what the improved response time for fire calls means for our community, what it means for people who may have an active fire in their home, the difference between being out the door in 90 seconds versus being out the door in 7 or 8 minutes.
Yes, in our business, and I'm speaking on the fire side now, in our business, moments mean life and death. So the difference between a 7-minute rollout time and a 11 to 14-minute response time is the difference between a small appliance fire and a kitchen fire, or a kitchen fire and a contents, or a complete structure fire. There's been a number of instances where I have arrived directly from either my residence or from the station and found fire that could have been easily extinguished had the engine been there along the same time that I was. Waiting that 5, 6, 7 minutes for the engine to arrive, sometimes the outcomes weren't nearly as good. There's a house on Highway 12 that we had a structure fire in, that when I arrived there, the fire was in the garage. Had I been on an engine, we could have extinguished that fire and the house would have been saved. By the time the engine got there, it was in the attic of the house, and in the end, the house was torn down. So the difference between 90-second rollout and 7-minute rollout becomes very significant for any place that we are in the community.
Thanks, Chief. A couple other things I just wanted to touch on, and then certainly we'll make sure all of you guys have time if you have anything to say. First of all, thank you to everyone who's online and folks who showed up here. This is such an important piece to this discussion, and the questions are great, and keep them coming. And please make sure before you vote on April 5th that you feel like you have all of the information and the data and the facts that you need to do so. I would also just advise, when we started this process internally, I began it with chatting with the folks in the back of this room, by reaching out to some of the people who are serving as those paid on-call firefighters for us to really get an understanding of what this model means to them and how this is impacting them personally, how this is impacting their lives with their families, how this is impacting their roles in their professional full-time jobs. And I was pretty floored. The candidness of them was pretty amazing, and to me just highlighted what a big issue this has become. I spoke with partners who talked about feeling like single parents most of their lives because you never know when your spouse might have to leave, and that they always choose to do so because they don't want to wake up in the morning and find out that enough people didn't respond to a call. And I think just making sure you are hearing from them and getting their input and their feedback is just such a crucial piece to this, because as City Manager Lemire has pointed out, that is really the problem that we are trying to address here, is that service model for our fire department. And again, the city has explored a tremendous amount of options in reviewing this. And this is not a new problem. I think that's another really important piece to point out, that some people seem to think, well, why are we just talking about this now? And both of our previous fire chiefs before Chief Roush have had these conversations internally with their teams, with city leadership, with city councils. And in my opinion, the biggest difference now is A, we're at a little bit more of a crisis level than we used to be, but B, we now have city leadership that was willing to take this on. This is not an easy task. This is not a fun and exciting project and work to do. No one likes to be in a position of asking people to pay more in taxes. It takes a lot to decide to take this on, but we have leadership that was ready and willing to do that. And that's why this is happening now. You will see other cities having very, very similar conversations. This is not exclusive to Fort Atkinson, and I think that's another important part. And lastly, I think the other thing I just wanted to touch on, to address a comment from Mr. Ryan, and that I think Mr. Letson was highlighting as well. I fully understand looking at a cost benefit analysis and looking at what we pay for something now versus what we are asking you to pay in the future. But I think it's really, really important to understand this is not an apples to apples situation. We are not looking at what we are paying for EMS now and asking our community to simply replace that service and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars more. EMS is a part of the solution that is being presented to the community to address our police staffing, our fire staffing, and EMS. So where I do understand looking at that cost benefit analysis, it's not an apples to apples situation that we're looking at. And it's not a traditional cost benefit analysis, because what is the cost of not having an adequately staffed fire department for your community? To me, I don't think those are things that we can put numbers on. So just my thoughts on that. And just to add to, all of our contact information is available. I'm more than happy to answer any additional questions that people may have, or will certainly direct you to other leaders who can, if I can't answer those. So thank you guys for being here.
Are there any other council members who wish to make a statement or ask any questions?
I would speak. Bruce Johnson, councilman. My childhood here, I've lived in Fort my entire life. I was born here. For the first 30 years of my life, my dad was a full-time fireman in Fort. In the 1950s, he was full-time fireman. We had 4 full-time firemen. We still have 4 full-time firemen. Any concept that the city of Fort hasn't grown in its need for more firemen, I can't grasp that. I think this is well overdue to add firefighters to the service. The number of things that their tasks that they do has increased in so many ways, and the number of things they need to know, the schooling and the EMT training and that kind of thing. We need more people. We've needed more people for a long time. This isn't something new. We didn't just hatch this overnight. It's been overdue. And if we do this, if we do add to the fire department like we should, it'd be silly for the Fort not to utilize them in their ambulance calls with their training and the ability and the staffing that would be available to Fort. None of us would want to make a phone call, a 911 phone call, and call for help and find out we had to wait till later this afternoon to get that help. We want that help to come right now as soon as we can get it. And our police department is overstaffed or understaffed with the amount of, they're overworked on what they got to do to meet today's modern thought process about what their responsibilities are and what their obligations are legally and the time they need to involve. They need a couple more people to lighten the load so they can do a good job for the city of Fort. I walk around the city of Fort, always have, always felt safe. Never have I walked around the city of Fort and felt like I was in danger. I want to continue to feel that way. I think that's part of the responsibility of the city council, to make sure that we do what we need to do so you guys can feel that way. I'm hoping you go forward with this and that you help us. I think if you look at the numbers that are available to you and educate yourselves, you'll agree. You won't have a hard time coming to the conclusion it's time. The amount of money that's invested, yeah, that's a little more. Nobody likes to pay a little more. But you don't want to go without what this gets you for your bang for your buck, because this is a place to do that. And I appreciate that you listen and consider this. I think you'll be pleased with what your response or what the outcome is if you go ahead with it. Thank you.
I think those were some great comments. I'm not going to try to go along too long here. I think we focused a lot on a lot of financial figures and statistics, and I know that's really important. I know that people want to have those numbers when they decide how they're going to go vote in April. And I appreciate everybody who came out tonight, everybody who tuned in online. This was a great moment of public participation, so I love to see that. To me, though, this whole conversation is really about what kind of values we have in the city of Fort Atkinson. I think back to this past August with the fire at the old Thomas Industries building and what kind of response that required. And thankfully, that isn't required too often, but when it happened, it was a little bit scary. And I just saw, and I remember the tremendous outpouring of public support for our emergency service personnel then. People donating bottled water, sandwiches, anything they could think of to help out. I also, though, want to talk about our police department. I recently had a chance to do a ride along with one of our local police officers, and I saw and was reminded of the kind of community focused policing that our local departments engaged in. One of my proudest moments here on the city council was a few years ago. We did have some unfortunate incidents of discrimination in the community that were done by some local individuals, and the city council at the time unanimously endorsed the unbiased, non-discriminatory policing policy that Chief Bump implemented a few years ago. And I really do think we have a good department that's focused on doing good for this community. But a lot of them have been working overtime. We've talked about the escalating calls on both sides. You know, I don't want anybody to get burned out, whether it's our firefighters or our police officers. So I think it's important that people take that into consideration. Finally, I just want to say, you know, the challenges aren't going to go away. I get why people don't want to pay more in property taxes right now. Inflation is high right now. Gas prices are up. I get it. But those are challenges that America is eventually going to get through. We've done it before. We're going to do it again. But these challenges, these escalating call volumes are not going to go away tomorrow or next year. They are here for the foreseeable future. So I'm hoping that our residents will take that all into consideration, weigh the benefits, weigh how we need to support our emergency service personnel. And I hope that you will all vote yes in April. So thank you.
Any other members of the council wishing to speak?
I'll speak to. So when I joined city council, first thing that I thought we had like 110 volunteer firefighters. I had no idea we only had 40 some. Like every time I drove past on a Tuesday night when you guys were training, it looked like you guys had, I mean, tons and tons of people. To find out we only had 40 to 50 people at any given time. Like it's for a town of 13,000, that blows me away that you can maintain like the level of service you guys do at 41 people. Like I don't think most people understand at 13,000 people with 41 people coming to fire calls, like that is a crazy number. I mean, I do have a ton of friends in the fire department, and I've known these guys since I was teens, probably like little league age, maybe even younger. And it just, I know their wives, I know their girlfriends, I know their fiancés. And I think a lot of the biggest problem, a lot of what's going on, I hate bringing up Facebook, but everybody thinks everybody's getting like extra money by this referendum going through. None of us get any extra money. Like this is all going towards helping the city and helping it develop as a business. Like you have to look at the city as a business. We bought the 75 acres out there to grow the community. The only way we're going to get more money is to get more tax revenue. We don't just magically get more taxes or get more money for the people within the community by like, that's how we get it. We get more houses in, we get more development, the levy limits go up, we get better policing, we get better firefighters, we get everything increases as the developments go up. I just this is kind of a no-brainer from my point of view. I kind of lost my train of thought. It's a passionate thing. It should be for all of us. It's, you know, when we call 911, we want to see people there quick. A lot of us don't need to call 911 on a regular basis. You know, it's our grandmas, our uncles, our, you know, the elderly people that are 65 plus that, you know, really need to have that help when their life alert goes off on their wristwatch. Like my grandma's had to have the beeper on the life alert in the last year, probably 3 times. You know, I wasn't able to get there. So it's been nice enough where people from the fire department or the police staff have been able to get her up off the floor. She's too stubborn to go into a nursing home. But there's a lot of people like that. I'd probably be the same way. I just, I hate that we had to vote no to Ryan Brothers. You know, I'm all about private entities doing well, and you guys have done a phenomenal job for the past 20 years, but it comes down to a decision of it's the 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan. We can't just be looking at next year, 2 years, 3 years. It's gotta be like, what is Fort looking like in the next 5, 10 years? You know, no one likes saying, you know, we've moved on, but at some point in time, you know, these guys are experts in their fields, and I'll reiterate this again, they're not getting any extra money by getting this referendum through. They are looking out for the best interests of our city, our villages, our towns. They get supported by our firefighters, our EMS, and our police. It's just, yeah, I just, if you have any questions, like Megan, Mason, and Bruce all said, like, if you have any questions whatsoever, like, you know, I ask tons of dumb questions, and I probably always will, but they're usually not dumb questions. They're legit questions. So please just don't be shy. At this point in time, anyone that's listening on Zoom, anyone out there that thinks you might have a dumb question, ask away, and I can guarantee you it's not a dumb question. Yeah, just please, like, ask away, ask all the questions you want, email, phone call. I pick up 7 days a week. I answer random numbers all the time. So that's part of my business. So you want to text too, that's perfectly fine as well. So yeah, so you guys in the back, keep doing what you're doing. You do a phenomenal job. Ryan Brothers, you guys have done a phenomenal job as well. Like, we're not taking anything away from you. Unfortunately, this is a business decision, and Fort's a business. It needs to keep running as such. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just a reminder, any questions can be directed to our email address, referendum@fortatkinsonwi.net. We do have another public information session on March 9th at 3 p.m. at City Hall, and again via Zoom. Any final thoughts from Chief Roush or Chief Bump before we wrap up here?
I was just gonna say, you know, take advantage of the opportunity to ask questions, even if it's specific just to the fire department or the police department. If you submit that question online through the email account that was set up, it will get to us and we will answer it in a timely manner. And hopefully the day of that you send that question in. So don't be shy or think that you're bothering us. We are willing to take the time to advocate for our agencies and answer your questions as well.
I would just add that the employers who employ our volunteers and their families are the people who need the relief. Expecting our volunteers to respond to over 500 calls a year is not sustainable. And we're currently on pace as of today. If numbers would continue, we're on pace to exceed 600 calls this year. This is, and I try to say on every presentation that we've done, this is not a referendum on Ryan Brothers. Ryan Brothers has been our public safety partners for over 20 years. They meet the terms of the contract. Unfortunately, the contract no longer fits the community, and the requirements for EMS are exceeding the current capabilities. The proposal that we're putting forth does staff 2 paramedic ambulances 24/7, backed up by a BLS unit staffed by the volunteers. So 3 units available for the community. And we believe that having those units dedicated to our district improves service.
That concludes. I'm sorry, we're done with that point, but okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.